In this series of videos, we're building a beginner's model railroad on IKEA tables using pre-cut plywood and pillars available as a kit. Track system of your choice. The result is a model railroad with 2 stations, a harbor with connection to a ferry boat. The layout also features a switching yard, which handles the freight car coming from the 2 industries.
And welcome to another episode in this series of videos where we're building a kind of beginner's layout from ground up. And in the previous episode we prepared the kind of flat surfaces around the buildings and industries, the roads, etc. And in this episode we will focus on the landscape part. So we will add rock sides, paint those, and we will also paint the landscape and give it kind of a basic detailing. So, you know, after this episode, the model railroad is ready for, you know, further detailing, but it has an acceptable look and it's just not a wasteland of white gypsum.
So, this is what it looked like when we left off from the last episode. All the foil in place, but all white. This is where we're going. The exposed mountain you see here are actually castings made in gypsum separately and then mounted onto the surface, and after that painted. Sounds complicated, but it isn't. Let's go through the process. And it starts here. This is a rubber mold from Noch. It's a part of their rock forming system. I think this is the Zugspitze. It's good to have a few of them at hand. Let's start by washing this mold. This washing has 2 purposes. One is to remove old gypsum from old castings, but also to wetten the surface. That way this profi-gysmasse or gypsum will float better into the casting. This powder should be mixed into water, and the mixing relation is 3 parts of gypsum powder and 1 part water. So here goes the water now, first into our mixing bucket, and then I sprinkle in slowly the gypsum into the water. And as long as the gypsum turns gray, you need more. So you see it's gradually turning gray and wet, and then I add more until I reached my 3 cups, and then I start to stir this until I get a kind of uniform gypsum blend. It typically takes 1 minute of stirring until you get this desired look, and it looks like this. Then we're ready to pour it into the molds. So I pour it in like this. Now my mix here became maybe slightly too thick. Otherwise it floats better into the mold. You can flatten the surface slightly like this. It's an advantage to have the rear surface as flat as possible because that simplifies assembly onto our landscaping foil later. So this will make a total of 5 rock castings. Leave these to dry now for about 4 hours. Once dry, they easily can be peeled off the molds like this. Alright, so here's then one completed rock part. Now let's move over to assembly. Back in the days I've assembled these rock pieces using hot melt glue, but it doesn't really stick all that well to the gypsum surface, so I've moved over to this latex rubber compound instead, which is I think much better. You can also use construction glue for this purpose, but since we have the latex rubber compound on hand already, I use that. Once you have it in place, mix additional gypsum or casting compound and plaster around the stones so you fill any gaps or it won't be perfect after this, but it is at least enough so we can cover the rest of the landscape using this casting compound or gypsum if you like. For this landscape covering works, I typically add a bit less of powder so I get a wetter blend of this casting compound. Add 3 layers so you have a decent thickness of gypsum covering the entire landscape, and then you can paint it with brown. I use a wide paint brush to just cover the entire landscape with this brown color. Now, Noch also have a landscape plaster compound, and it's very suitable because it doesn't harden all that fast, so you can work with it for 20 minutes before it actually sets. So as I said before, it will not be perfect. You will still have a lot of gaps and stuff between your rock parts after they are in place. So this plaster is the solution to overcome that. So I just smear it in and push it into the cracks and crevices using either my fingertips or with a paintbrush like this. Yeah. And after this, you can leave it to dry overnight, and then we're ready to paint this. Before painting, we're covering the tracks so they don't get all stained by paint. This warm gray paint is mixed from acrylic white, plus a portion of burnt umber and a little bit of black into it. And then I add a lot of water because it's important to keep this first layer of paint very thin, otherwise it ruins the structure, the surface structure of the castings, and that's something we worked hard to preserve, so let's keep the paint thin. So here you see that I've painted now all of those surfaces where I've been using castings. The second layer of paint on this, once it has dried, is some detailing. And for my area I have a lot of iron in the ground, so I will be using a kind of red and brown. This is acrylic paint as well, and I just dry brush it, so don't use a lot of paint on the paintbrush, just a bit, and use a kind of hard, stiff brush so you get a touch of these colors. The result may look a bit worrying at this point, but don't worry, we will add 2 additional layers with paint. The first one is a black wash. This wash is mixed from 1 part of black acrylic paint, a tiny portion of brown, and 4 parts water. And I make sure that this black wash covers all of those previously painted surfaces. Now leave this to dry properly a few hours before we're adding the 4th and final layer of paint. And that is a dry brushed layer of white. And the dry brushing, as mentioned earlier, is you use a very little paint on your paintbrush, wipe most off, and then just touch the top surfaces of your mountains with this white or light gray paint. This way you will highlight the contours of the rock side, at the same time brighten the surface to your liking. Alright, then we're done with the rock side. Let's now add some turf onto the brown painted landscape. For this I'm applying PVA glue over the entire brown surface, and then I sprinkle in Woodland Scenic Earth Blend. I don't cover all of the glued surfaces with this. I cover the 50%, and doing that I used 2 big bags of this earth blend. For the remaining parts, I instead use green blend. And for that, I only needed one big bag to cover the entire layout. Once I covered an area with these two, I use a soft white brush to push the turf into the glue. This also contributes to a more realistic look. Once completed, your originally brown painted landscape surfaces will look like this, and the rock sides will look something like this. In a later episode we will add also grass and bushes, and these will then marry perfectly with the landscape.
Alright, so now all the rock sides and the mountains are in place, plus we have added an acceptable looking surface to the landscape, so it looks kind of pretty, I would say. In the next episode we will continue to work on the landscape surface, but with the water, so next video up is the water effect. Did you know that this channel is totally dependent on the support from the viewers like you? So if you want to be one of the good guys, get over to Patreon, set up a support account there from like $1 per month, or make a one-off donation via the PayPal dialog found in the video description below. Also, don't forget to subscribe and enable that little bell, and you will get a notification once next video gets published. Until that happens, see ya.